At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. Captain Zahib watched in satisfaction as the human colony world grew larger and larger through the viewport. The order to begin the bombing already lodged in his throat, waiting only for the censor officer's final confirmation that the humans had truly done the unthinkable, accepted the Nalek defectors and granted them asylum, defying all reason and the supreme will of the Nalek Emperor. The planet below was a modest thing, unremarkable by most standards. Terran class, the humans called it. Green continents sprawled across blue oceans, white clouds drifting in lazy formations that reminded Zahib of the storm patterns back on the homeworld. But where the homeworld storms carried the blessed radiation that nourished Nalek skin, this world's weather was soft, weak, designed for creatures who couldn't withstand proper stellar fury. It was fitting, he thought, that such a world would harbor traitors. He turned from the viewport, ready to issue the preliminary scan order, and froze. Zadir stood directly behind him. The Imperial liaison had moved without sound, without warning, and now stood less than a meter away like a cold statue carved from living flesh. Those purple eyes stared directly at Zahib's back, or rather, where his back had been moments before. The liaison hadn't even adjusted his gaze when Zahib turned. He simply continued staring, as if the captain's body were merely an inconvenient obstruction to whatever dark thoughts occupied that mind. A chill ran through Zahib's core, the kind that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with proximity to danger. Zadir's sharp black uniform seemed to absorb all light, all happiness, making him appear as a void-shaped hole in reality. The fabric contrasted starkly with his red and black dotted skin, creating an effect that made Zahib's eyes want to slide away, to look anywhere else. But looking away from Zadir was dangerous. Everyone knew that. The Imperial earrings, those distinctive loops of black metal that didn't pierce the ear but hung loose around the long, backward-pointing auricles, swayed as Zadir tilted his head a fraction of a degree. A mark of loyalty to the Emperor, a mark that said, "I am watching. I am always watching." And those eyes. Those frozen purple eyes that stared without blinking, without the normal micro-expressions that gave Nalek faces their fluidity. Their species had evolved faces more expressive than humans, capable of conveying emotions that didn't always map perfectly to human equivalents, but somehow converged on meanings both subtle and profound. A Nalek could smile in ways that meant 7 different things, or frown with implications that ranged from mild disappointment to murderous intent. But Zadir's face showed nothing, just that terrible, empty stare. Zahib felt his own face contort into a deep frown of displeasure, his ears flattening against his skull before he caught himself. The way this Imperial dog stood behind him, like an ambush predator sizing up prey, made his skin crawl beneath his captain's insignia. Here, Zahib was, moments ago, rejoicing internally at the prospect of bombardment, of finally punishing those defectors who had abandoned the Empire, and the foolish humans who sheltered them. And this creature could make even that satisfaction feel hollow and dangerous. "I was just about to order the planetary scan," Zahib said, keeping his voice level despite the instinct to snarl. "We'll proceed with the bombardment once we've confirmed the defectors' locations. You can report back to the Emperor that everything is proceeding according to plan." He paused, then added with calculated deference, "You don't have anything bad to say about my leadership, right?" The question echoed between them, unanswered and persistent. Zadir said nothing. He simply continued staring with those purple eyes, his face as expressionless as deep space, as unchanging as the void. The silence stretched, became uncomfortable, then became suffocating. Zahib felt his ears going limp, despite his best efforts to keep them upright, to project the authority a captain should command on his own bridge. But Zadir had this way about him, this talent for making everyone around him feel small, exposed, guilty of crimes not yet committed, but already anticipated. The Imperial liaison had boarded at the last station before they jumped into human territory. No warning, no explanation beyond the official orders that placed him aboard as Imperial Observer. But everyone knew what Zadir really was. Cleansing agent. Loyalty enforcer. The Emperor's personal knife slipped between the ribs of his own military to ensure perfect obedience. After what felt like an eternity, Zadir finally spoke. "Just do your job, Captain," he said, his voice as flat and cold as his expression, "and I'll do mine." Then he turned and left the bridge without another word, without looking back, his footsteps utterly silent despite the metal deck plating. Zahib swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He stared at the bridge door as it slid shut behind Zadir's departing form, then slowly became aware of eyes on him. Not hostile eyes, worse, pitying eyes. He glanced around the bridge. The small crew, 5 stations, carefully chosen for this mission, looked away quickly when his gaze found them. Vrillin at communications, his fingers still poised over the touchscreen interface, but his attention clearly having been on the exchange. Xanid at weapons, pretending to study targeting parameters. Kholif at navigation, suddenly fascinated by the orbital approach vectors. And Xylee at sensors, her expression the most obvious, the most damaging. She looked at him with genuine sympathy, perhaps even sorrow. They pitied him. They'd watched the Imperial dog make their captain squirm on his own bridge, watched his ears go limp in submission, watched him struggle for composure, and they felt bad for him because of it. This was the last thing a captain wanted. Not fear. Fear could be useful, could sharpen a crew's respect into obedience. Not even resentment. Resentment meant they still saw him as powerful enough to oppose. But pity? Pity meant they'd seen him helpless, diminished, reduced to something less than the authority he was supposed to represent. Zahib felt something harden in his chest. Fine. Let them pity him when dealing with that Imperial parasite. But when it came to actual command, when it came to the work of destroying defectors and their human sympathizers, they would remember who commanded this vessel. He straightened, letting his ears rise to full attention, and turned his gaze to Xylee with sharp authority. "Sensor officer," he said, his voice crisp and direct. "Begin full planetary scan. I want every defector signature identified, categorized, and transmitted to weapons control. Understood?" Xylee seemed to snap out of her sympathetic reverie, her own ears perking up as she focused on her station. "Yes, Captain. Immediately." "Good." Zahib allowed himself a small smile, the kind that showed just the tips of his inner teeth. Satisfaction without threat. "Use everything we have. Deep scan drones, orbital platforms, integrated sensor arrays, maximum sensitivity." The Dalek had the best scanning technology in the galaxy when it came to life signatures. They'd had to develop it, had refined it over centuries of hunting their own citizens when they betrayed the Empire. Defectors, dissidents, refugees. The Empire never stopped looking for them, never stopped finding them. Other species had better weapons, better shields, better engines, but when it came to finding a specific living being among billions, no one had matched Dalek precision. And here, against humans, it would be laughably easy. Humans weren't famous for anti-scanning technology. They relied on distance, on the sheer vastness of space, on hiding among their own populations. But they'd never developed the kind of sensor spoofing capabilities that might actually matter. Probably never imagined they'd need to. Xylee's fingers worked quickly across the touchscreen interface, her movements precise. She'd been doing this for 6 years now, since before Zahib had taken command of this vessel, He watched as she activated the scanning algorithms, her fingers moving across the luminous display, tapping through menus, adjusting parameters, initiating the complex dance of sensor coordination that would strip away every attempt at concealment the planet below might offer. "Deploying deep scan drones," she reported, her voice steady. "Activating orbital platforms, setting integrated arrays to maximum sensitivity." Her red ears twitched as data began flowing across her screens, her facial expression serious. "Captain, full planetary scan will take approximately 6 minutes to complete with current parameters. However," she paused, her eyes widening a bit, "I'm already detecting defector signatures on the surface." Zahib felt a savage satisfaction bloom in his chest. "How many?" "Preliminary count shows at least 1,000 individual Nalek life signs living among human population centers," Xylee said, her fingers still working the interface as more data resolved. "They're not even trying to hide, Captain. They're integrated into human settlements, human cities, human infrastructure." "Of course they're not hiding," Zahib said, his voice dripping with contempt. "They think the humans will protect them. They think asylum means something." He turned to Xanad at weapons control. "Weapons officer, do we have enough ordnance to deal with all these defectors?" He paused, then added with a dark smile. "Disregarding human collateral damage, of course." The bridge erupted in laughter. Not nervous laughter, not uncertain laughter, but genuine amusement. The kind of laughter that came from warriors who knew they held all the advantages, who faced an enemy so outmatched that the outcome was never in doubt. Even Xylee chuckled, her earlier sympathy forgotten in the shared moment of dark humor. Xanad's ears were nearly vertical as he checked his weapons inventory. "Captain, we brought enough to glass half the planet," he said, his voice filled with pride. "The humans didn't even bring their fleet from soul space. They have 3 orbital defense platforms and maybe 24 system patrol craft. Against us?" He made a dismissive gesture with one hand. "They're helpless, completely helpless. We could take our time, select our targets individually, and they couldn't do anything but watch their precious defectors burn." Zahib felt the energy on the bridge shift, felt his crew's attention focusing back on him, not with pity, but with anticipation. This was what they'd come for. This was what they'd trained for. The destruction of traitors, the punishment of those who defied the Emperor, and the demonstration to any other species foolish enough to think they could shelter Nalek defectors that such protection was an illusion, a fantasy that ended in fire from orbit. He looked around the bridge, taking in the scene. Vrillin at communications, ready to receive targeting data and coordinate the attack. Xanad at weapons, his screens already showing preliminary bombardment solutions, missile trajectories calculated and ready. Kolif at navigation, maintaining their orbital approach, adjusting their position to maximize weapons effectiveness. And Xylee at sensors, her arrays peeling back every secret the planet below thought it could keep. His crew, his ship, his mission. Zahib's gaze returned to the viewport, to the planet growing ever larger as they descended into bombardment range. Those green continents would look very different soon. Those white clouds would be joined by darker ones, the kind that rose from impact sites and burning cities. And those blue oceans would reflect a different kind of light, the light of orbital strikes, of atmosphere igniting, of justice delivered from above. The humans would panic when the missiles began to fall. They would scramble their inadequate defenses, broadcast desperate pleas for cessation, maybe even try to hand the defectors over and apologize for sheltering them, as if anything they did now would make a difference. How foolish they were, Zahib thought, to help those stupid individuals from his own species who didn't know better than to seek their own deaths. Nowhere in Zahib's mind did the possibility of resistance exist. Why would it? The humans were outgunned, outmatched, caught completely by surprise. Their main fleet was systems away. Their defenses were minimal. Their technology was inferior in every category that mattered. In his mind, this wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be an execution, clean and simple and utterly one-sided. "Captain," Xylee said, breaking into his thoughts, 4 minutes until full scan completion. Defector count is now up to 1,200 and rising as the deep scan drones penetrate urban shielding. Excellent, Zahib said. He clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture of authority and calm command. Continue the scan. When we strike, I want every single defector signature accounted for. No one escapes. No one survives. Yes, Captain, Xylee replied. The bridge settled into focus, each officer attending to their duties. This was what they'd drilled for, what they'd prepared for, during the long journey into human territory. The moment when loyalty would be rewarded, treason would be punished, and the Empire's reach would be proven infinite. Zahib stared at the planet below and smiled. The humans had no idea what was coming. In minutes, their world would transform from a peaceful colony into a burning testament to Imperial power. And as far as he knew, there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. Nothing at all. Minutes before the bombardment began, just as the Imperial ship arrived at the human colony, Xylee was having a lazy evening on her sleeping hammock. She watched her human neighbors play with their little kid in the yard next door, feeling a complex mixture of nostalgia and relief. She was glad her own kids were older now, both at school during these morning and evening hours, leaving her alone to take care of her home, her life, and navigate the never-ending adaptation period of starting anew among a different species. All of this, the hammock, the neighbors, the strange yellow sun overhead, the safety, the peace, existed because she had once said a few words that displeased a certain Imperial family. Just a few words. A casual observation at a social gathering about resource allocation that happened to reach the wrong ears. And for that, she'd been forced to flee the Empire while still pregnant with her daughter, choosing exile over the alternative that awaited those who embarrassed the powerful. The hammock swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. The human child laughed as his father swung him in circles. Xylee closed her eyes, letting the sounds wash over her, trying to feel grateful instead of bitter. Then her small data slate started ringing in her pocket. She grimaced, shifting in the hammock's embrace as she tried to reach the device. The hammock's fabric constraints made it awkward, and she had to twist her body at an uncomfortable angle to get her hand into her pocket. Already she felt annoyed at the prospect of something coming up to ruin her well-deserved rest. Probably someone from the Integration Committee with another question about Nalic dietary requirements, or maybe the school with some minor issue about one of her kids. Her fingers finally closed around the data slate and pulled it free. Her heart almost stopped. The name on the screen couldn't be real. She pulled her hair aside with her free hand, bringing the screen closer to her purple eyes, reading again, certain her mind must be playing tricks on her. Some glitch in the display, some corruption in the contact database, anything other than what she was seeing. But nothing changed. The name remained the same. Zadir, her ex-husband, the one who had chosen his loyalty to the Empire over her, the one who had stood in their quarters that final night and told her that she'd made her choice, and now he was making his. The one who wore those imperial earrings and that black uniform, and those cold, terrible eyes that had once looked at her with something approaching warmth. Xylee's hands began to shake. She almost threw the data slate across the yard, almost broke the device in half right there in the hammock. But some instinct made her look at the message instead. Some part of her brain that still functioned, despite the shock and the sudden spike of adrenaline that made her skin feel too tight. The words on the screen resolved into a sentence. She froze. Flee. Colony bombardment in 30 minutes. Take our daughter and run. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the slate. Her mind raced, pulling up memories she'd tried to bury, knowledge she'd tried to forget. The typical Imperial reaction when they found defectors. Attack from orbit. Overwhelming force. Broadcasted in real time back to the Empire to dissuade others from doing the same. Control through fear. Make examples of the dead so the living would obey. No, 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 she whispered. the words tumbling out unbidden. "This can't be happening!" She basically threw herself out of the hammock, her body moving before her mind fully processed what she was doing. She hit the ground hard, stumbled, caught herself against the porch railing. Her human neighbors stopped their playing and stared at her, concern evident on their faces. She ignored their gazes completely. Her mind split into two paths of action, two equally urgent imperatives that pulled her in opposite directions. Run to the school to get the kids, rush to the mayor's office to inform them of the imminent attack. Both screamed for immediate action. Both seemed like the only possible choice. The school was 6 blocks north. The mayor's office was 4 blocks east. Her children were in one direction, potential salvation in the other. Even the possibility that Zadir might be lying crossed her mind as she stood there frozen by indecision. Maybe this was a test. Maybe this was a trap. Maybe he was trying to draw her out, to make her reveal herself to... No. The data slate didn't have FTL capabilities. There was no Ansible on a device this small. No quantum entanglement communicator. Nothing that could send a message faster than light across the vast distances between stars. Which meant he had to be here in this system, probably orbiting this planet right now to send her this message. The physics didn't lie. He was here. The threat was real. She forced herself to think, to cut through the panic that wanted to drown her rational mind. A memory surfaced, a conversation months ago with John and some of the other city officials. She'd been worried, anxious about the possibility of discovery, and had asked what would happen if the Empire came looking for them. The humans had laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine amusement. John had said something about old tech, about how this colony was far from helpless. Others had mentioned defensive systems, but she'd been too embarrassed by their laughter to ask for details. Her reasoning crystallized in an instant of perfect clarity. If the humans really did have defensive capabilities, they needed to know now to activate them. The school had protocols. She'd seen the emergency procedures posted in the hallways, had attended the security briefings. The kids would be moved to bunkers automatically if an attack was detected. The school had automated systems for that, but the defense systems needed warning time. They needed to be armed and ready before the missiles started falling. Her information could save everyone, including her children. Her legs were already moving before she fully made the decision. Zarely ran. She ran like she hadn't run since fleeing the Empire, since those desperate days of escape with her unborn daughter pressing against her organs, making every breath an effort. She ran past startled pedestrians, past confused neighbors, past storefronts and gardens, and all the trappings of the peaceful life she'd built here. The minutes-long journey became a blur of motion and fear. Her lungs burned, her legs pumped, her purple eyes fixed on the path ahead, barely registering the obstacles she dodged around. Someone called her name. She didn't stop. Something fell from her pocket. She didn't care. The data slate clutched in her hand was all that mattered, its message burning in her mind like a brand. 30 minutes, maybe less now, maybe 25, maybe 20. When she finally came back to herself, to conscious awareness of her surroundings, she was already inside the government building. She had barged through the front entrance, ignored a human secretary who called after her, pushed someone of her own species aside in a corridor without even noticing whether they were male or female. Her body had operated on pure instinct, pure desperate need, while her mind remained locked in that loop of terror and calculation. Now she stood in the doorway of the mayor's office, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her heart pounding so hard she couldn't feel it in her throat. John sat behind his desk, looking up at her with surprise that quickly shifted to concern. She tried to speak. Her mouth opened. No words came out, just gasping breaths and the sound of her own pulse roaring in her ears. "Zarely?" John stood, moving around his desk toward her. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head violently, still struggling to breathe, to form words, to convey the magnitude of what was happening. "Calm down," he said, his voice taking on that particular tone he used when dealing with crises. He'd used it before with her, during her early days here when the nightmares had been constant and the fear of discovery had made her jump at shadows. Just breathe. Whatever it is, we can handle it. Just breathe and tell me what happened. His familiarity calmed her slightly. They'd known each other for 3 years now. He'd been the one to approve her asylum request, to help her navigate the human bureaucracy, to find housing and schools and work. She forced air into her lungs, forced her vocal cords to cooperate. "The planet," she managed. "Attack. Empire. Minutes." His expression shifted from concern to confusion. "What?" She held up the data slate, thrust it toward him with shaking hands. "The planet is about to be attacked by the Empire." John's response was not what she expected. He glanced at the slate, then at her, then at his own communication device on his desk. "Huh," he said thoughtfully. "That would explain why I haven't been able to reach the governor for the past few minutes." He actually smiled, a wry expression that made her want to scream. "Well, the good news is he doesn't hate me enough to ignore me despite our political differences. I was starting to worry I'd offended him at last week's budget meeting." Zerily stared at him in disbelief. Her entire body was shaking with adrenaline and terror, and he was making jokes about political relationships? "Are you—" She had to stop, had to breathe, had to channel her panic into something productive. "Are you listening to me? The Empire is here. They are going to bomb us. They are going to kill everyone." Her voice had risen to nearly a shout by the end. She didn't care. Nothing about his reaction made sense. Why wasn't he panicking? Why wasn't he running for the emergency systems? Why wasn't he— John rose from his seat, his expression finally registering the full extent of her distress. He moved around the desk quickly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Zerily, I'm sorry. I'm being an ass. I didn't mean to—" He reached her and pulled her into an embrace. She felt his warmth, his solidity, his utterly human certainty that somehow everything would be okay. Her shaking slowed. Her breathing began to even out. For just a moment, she let herself lean into that embrace, let herself believe that maybe he knew something she didn't. Then she pulled back, grabbing his shoulders, her purple eyes meeting his brown ones. "The kids," she said. "John, what about the kids? They're at school and the missiles are coming and—" He was already reaching for his data slate, his fingers working quickly across the touchscreen. He studied it for a moment, then looked back at her with calm reassurance. "They're being moved to bunkers as we speak," he said. "All the schools activated emergency protocols 3 minutes ago. The kids are safe, Zerily. The best thing we can do now is wait for the planetary defense system to engage." She felt a flash of anger cut through her fear. Wait? Just wait? Do nothing while— "Come here." He took her hand gently but firmly and pulled her toward the window that dominated one wall of his office. The view looked out over the city center, showing the neat grid of streets, the mixture of human and Nalic architecture, the distant spaceport with its landing pads and control towers. "The interceptors are very much reliable," John said, his voice conveying a note of pride that seemed wildly inappropriate given their circumstances. "They were invented in the 20th century, back when we were still confined to Earth. We improved them further over the next 2 centuries. Better propulsion, better targeting, better kill ratios. By the time humanity reached the stars, we'd achieved something pretty close to perfection." He laughed then, actually laughed. The sound loud and genuine and completely insane to Zerily's ears. "You have to understand," he continued, still smiling. "Humans have been throwing missiles at each other for so long that there's really no reason to worry about defense. We got very, very good at it out of sheer necessity. Every advance in offensive missiles drove a corresponding advance in defensive systems. It's been an arms race for 500 years, and the defensive side nullified the attacker's advantage a long time ago." Zerily stared at him, her expression clearly conveying what her voice couldn't quite articulate. "So, we do nothing then? We just stand here?" John caught her expression, and his smile softened into something more understanding. He pointed out the window at the sky, which still looked peaceful and blue and utterly normal. "Let's just watch the fireworks," he said quietly. Zarely looked at him, then at the window, then back at him. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her heart still raced. Her children were in bunkers. The defense systems were active. John seemed completely unconcerned. And somewhere up there, beyond that deceptively peaceful sky, Zadir and his Imperial ship were preparing to rain death down on everything she'd built here. She turned back to the window and waited, John's warm hand in hers for whatever was about to happen. The sky remained blue, the city remained calm, and high above, invisible to the naked eye, an ancient human military doctrine that had kept Earth alive through its most violent centuries was about to meet an empire that had never faced real resistance. Zarely realized she was holding her breath. Then, far in the distance, she saw the first flash of light. Orbiting the planet, Captain Zahib watched through the viewport in deep satisfaction as countless warheads rained down below. Hundreds of them, each following a calculated trajectory, screamed through the atmosphere to detonate among the cities and settlements where the defectors hid. The targeting data had been perfect. The launch sequence had been flawless. Within minutes, the bombardment would claim the lives of every single traitor who had fled the Empire, and certainly those of any humans foolish enough to be near them. The missiles appeared as bright streaks against the darkness of space, their drives burning as they accelerated toward their targets. It was beautiful in its way. The mathematics of destruction rendered visible, justice made manifest. "Captain?" Xylie's voice cut through his satisfaction. There was something wrong in her tone, something uncertain that made his ears go rigid with concern. "What is it, Sensor Officer?" he asked, not taking his eyes from the viewport. The first warhead should be entering the upper atmosphere by now. Soon there would be flashes of light on the surface, blooms of fire that would— "Sir, something's not right." Zahib turned from the viewport and walked quickly to her station. The touchscreen display showed a tactical overview of the bombardment, hundreds of markers representing the warheads as they descended toward their targets. But even as he watched, the markers began disappearing. Not impacting, disappearing. "What am I looking at?" Zahib demanded, leaning closer to the display. "Why are the warheads vanishing before they even reach the thick part of the atmosphere?" Xylie's fingers worked across the interface, pulling up data streams, cross-referencing sensor feeds. Her ears were flat against her skull in confusion. "I don't know, Captain. The tracking shows them reaching approximately 150 kilometers altitude and then gone. No detonation signatures, no debris fields, just gone." "Is this some kind of failure in the tracking system?" Zahib felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "The viewing interface itself? Some kind of glitch?" "Unlikely, sir." Xylie brought up a secondary display showing raw sensor data. "I'm getting confirmation from multiple independent systems. The orbital platforms, the ship's main array, the targeting drones, they all show the same thing. The warheads are being destroyed before atmospheric entry." Zahib stared at the displays, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. This didn't make sense. This couldn't be happening. The humans had no fleet in the system. They had minimal orbital defenses. They were supposed to be helpless. "Captain," Xanad spoke up from weapons control, his voice hinting disbelief. I think the humans are destroying the warheads." "That shouldn't be possible," Zahib said immediately. The rest of the crew made sounds of agreement, their ears perking up in support of their captain's assessment. "There are too many warheads. We launch kinetic impactors mixed with the standard munitions. The tracking and targeting requirements alone would be— the humans would have an extremely hard time even detecting them at all, let alone intercepting them." "Sir?" Xanad's fingers moved across his touchscreen, bringing up external camera feeds. "Look at this. Look at the feeds from the warheads themselves, moments before interception." The main viewport flickered, replaced by a split-screen display showing multiple camera angles. Zahib watched as the view from a descending warhead showed the curve of the planet below, the darkness of space above, and then a flash. Something impossibly fast intercepting the warhead. The feed cut to static. Another feed, Another interception. The counter-missile appeared as barely a blur before impact. Again. Every single feed showed the same thing. Precision interception at ranges that should have been impossible according to any common sense. The bridge fell into silence as the evidence piled up before them. Successful defense. Impossible, unthinkable, but undeniable successful defense. Zahib felt panic beginning to claw at his chest. His mind raced ahead to what this meant. He would have to report his failure to Zadir, to that Imperial dog who was probably watching even now, who saw everything, who would report back to the Emperor that Captain Zahib had failed in his mission. Any prospects of promotion in the next 10 cycles would evaporate. His career would... "Captain," Xanad said quietly, "we've already fired 80% of our ordnance. 0 confirmed casualties so far." The words hit Zahib very hard. 80%. Nearly everything they'd brought. And the humans had stopped it all. Every single warhead, every kinetic impactor, everything they'd thrown at the planet had been swatted from the sky like insects. He felt something inside him break. The certainty that had sustained him, the absolute conviction that this mission would succeed, crumbled into dust. They had failed. He had failed. And now, the bridge door slid open. Zadir entered with that stone-cold face of his, those purple eyes showing nothing, revealing nothing. He moved with slow steps, crossing the bridge in absolute silence, while every eye tracked his movement. Zahib's mouth went dry. He tried to formulate words, tried to find some way to explain, to downplay the failure that was evident on every display. "Imperial Liaison, The slap came without warning. Zadir's hand caught Zahib across the face with enough force to snap his head to the side. The captain stumbled, more from shock than impact. The bridge erupted in gasps and startled exclamations. Public violence like this was unusual, even for the Imperial dogs, even for the loyalty enforcers who operated outside normal military regulations. Zahib raised his hand to his stinging face, trying to process what had just happened, and Zadir slapped him again. Same hand, same side, harder this time. "You..." Zahib started to say something, anything, but Zadir's fist drove into his belly. The captain doubled over, air exploding from his lungs, his eyes watering from the sudden pain. He tried to gasp for breath, tried to straighten up, and Zadir's foot caught him in the face. The kick broke his nose with a wet crunch. Blood sprayed across the deck plating as Zahib went down hard, his vision exploding into stars and darkness. He hit the floor on his side, curled around the pain in his gut, hot blood pouring from his shattered nose and filling his mouth with the taste of copper and failure. Through the haze of pain and shock, he was dimly aware of the crew frozen at their stations, staring in horror. No one moved to help him, no one dared. Zadir stood over him like a statue, perfectly still except for the slight rise and fall of his chest. Zahib's ears had gone completely limp, lying flat against his skull in submission and terror. Blood dripped from his face onto the deck. He'd never been so utterly humiliated, so completely broken in front of his own crew. Zadir looked down at him for a long moment, his expression still showing nothing, those purple eyes as cold and empty as the void outside. Then he turned and walked toward the bridge door, his footsteps the only sound in the shocked silence. "I will report your failure to the Emperor," Zadir said without looking back. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Count yourself lucky that you're still alive." The door slid shut behind him. Zahib lay on the deck, bleeding and broken, trying to understand what had just happened. The Imperial dog's reaction had been extreme, even by the brutal standards of the loyalty enforcers. The violence had been personal in a way that went beyond single punishment for military failure. Perhaps, Zahib thought through the fog of pain, he had severely underestimated this particular dog's loyalty to the Empire. Zarely and John stood by the window for several hours, watching the sky light up with interceptions. The flashes became almost rhythmic, a recurring glow reassuring them as human defensive systems eliminated threat after threat. John had abused his position of authority just a bit to avoid the evacuation orders, insisting that, as mayor, he needed to maintain observation of the situation. No one argued too strenuously. When the flashes finally stopped and the all-clear sounded across the city, John laughed. "It's gonna be a pain in the ass to restock those missiles," he said, shaking his head with amusement. "But, on the bright side, it'll be much easier now to get an armada assigned to this planet, and permission to deploy some bigger defensive weapons. The governor's been fighting for that authorization for years. Nothing like an actual attack to cut through bureaucratic red tape." Zerily stared at him, still processing everything she'd witnessed. That deadly attack was really just fireworks, just like you said. John grinned at her, squeezing her hand gently. "I told you so." Before she could respond, the office door burst open. 2 children rushed in, a human boy of about 8 with John's dark hair and easy smile, and Zarily's biological daughter of the same age, her purple eyes bright with excitement and her ears perked up in joy. "Mother!" her daughter called out. "Father!" the boy shouted at the same time. They ran toward the window, toward their parents, their voices tumbling over each other as they described the adventure of being evacuated to the bunkers, the strange sounds from above, the all-clear announcement. Zerily felt John's arm around her shoulders as she knelt down to embrace both children. Her daughter pressed against her left side, her adoptive son against her right, and John's warmth at her back. The hint of worry that had been coiled in her chest for hours began to fully unwind. She thought of Zadir's warning, of the message that had sent her running through the streets in panic. She thought of the empire she'd fled, of the life she'd left behind, of all the fear and uncertainty that had followed her across the stars. And she felt grateful, so deeply, profoundly grateful, that she had left when she had the chance, that she had found this place, these people, this family. "We're safe," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. John kissed the top of her head. "We're safe," he agreed. Above them, the sky was clear and blue and peaceful once more.